All right, thanks very much. So thanks everybody for sticking around. As some of you leave, that's okay. I'm not insulted. So what can a headless chicken teach you about walking? Well, I'm going to turn this talk so far on its head. See what I did? That's a double joke. So my expertise is the neural control of locomotion, but my real expertise are dad jokes. But the question is, what can a headless chicken teach you about walking? And the answer is quite a lot. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about as a big picture, kind of high level view of what we do in the lab. Now, I want to introduce Miracle Mike. That's the wrong Mike, sorry. That's Magic Mike. We'll skip past that. So I want to introduce Miracle Mike. All right? So, and Miracle Mike, as you'll see in a second, is a headless chicken. And he provided the info or the background as to why it is we do what we do. So Mike was a very famous chicken. Miracle Mike, not Magic Mike. So what you're looking at is a picture of Miracle Mike, and you can see his agent is holding his head. This is the cover of Time magazine. So Mike was a chicken living happily on a farm in 1945, and the farmer came out and he had his mother-in-law coming over for dinner. So of course you have to have a very nice dinner. He grabbed a big plump Mike and removed his head, so to speak, because that's what you have to do if you want to have a chicken for supper. This is in Frutia, Colorado, right? So he decapitated Mike, removed his head, and Mike stood up and kept pecking for food, even though he didn't have a head. He walked around, he flapped his wings, and he could run. So what does that have to do with human neurophysiology lab and the study of walking? Well, I said I was going to turn these conversations on their head, and that's because a lot of the focus thus far has been on the brain. Now, the brain is very important for movement, but if Mike the Headless Chicken doesn't have a brain, how can he walk? Well, the answer is quite simple. The vast majority of the neural control of walking is actually in the spinal cord. So that's a chicken, that's great. But what about humans? Well, this is actually I took a screenshot of a video. This was ABC News in 2017. There was a viral video going around on social media about a newborn baby walking minutes after birth. And so what you're looking at there is a physician or a nurse holding a newborn, literally just born. And what would happen is when the infant, or what you could see in the video, was that when the infant, the bottom of their foot touched the bed, they began doing this locomotor pattern. They tried to walk. Now, for a few neurophysiologists in the room, myself included, I know that when I had my son and he was a few days old, I did the same thing. And yeah, it works, right? They do this walking motion. Now, is a newborn saying, oh, I need to walk from here to there, or is the brain developed? They can't even hold their head up. So this and other indirect evidence suggests that, like Mike the Headless Chicken, we too have the capability to produce locomotion in the spinal cord, a complex network of cells referred to as the central pattern generator. Now, the spinal cord is very important. And in humans, we also have this capability, and we won't get into it today, but this has relevance for things like spinal cord injury and regaining of locomotor output. There's a lot of fascinating research in that field. But we also know that if you were to lop the head off a human, unlike Mike, they are not going to live for 18 months. They are not going to walk around. That's a whole other story. And the brain, we know, is far more important for walking in humans than it is for chickens, cats, dogs, rats, mice, what have you. And so to illustrate that point, and interesting, I just found this within the last couple of years, I found this interesting example of the importance of the brain. So the sea squirt is an animal that lives, you got it, in the sea, and it floats around its environment. It has one eye, a very simple brain, and a simple spinal cord. And it moves around its environment in search of a good place to plant itself, a good rock or coral or what have you, so it can stay there for the rest of its life. Now, what would it need for sustenance? It would need food passing by so it can grab the food. And as humans, why do we move? Well, we move to get food, for shelter, and to run away from predators, evolutionary speaking. I can say that right. Anyway, from an evolutionary perspective, there you go. So the sea squirt, once it finds this rock it wants to live on, it actually absorbs or consumes its eye and its brain. So what's the point? Well, the point is once movement is no longer required, it doesn't need a brain. So I told you the spinal cord is very important, but so too is the brain, particularly in humans. So the research in our lab, in the human neurophysiology lab, myself and Dr. Button share the lab, we look at arm cycling as a model of locomotion. Because if you think about it, arm cycling, literally cycling a bike with your hands, it involves left-right alternation. It involves the activation or sequential activation of various muscles, just like walking. And work from, in particular, actually, Dr. Piercy's PhD supervisor over the past 20 years, Dr. Paul Zare, has shown quite convincingly that this neural network in the spinal cord that produces walking also produces other movements like arm cycling, or has a large part in producing them. Arm cycling, swimming, running, we call those locomotor outputs. So the research in our lab, we take the approach that, okay, well, if my car were to break down, if this were me and I am not mechanically inclined, I would have no idea how to fix it. Why? Because I have no idea how it works. So we take the approach that you can't fix it if you don't know how it works, which you can see from the presentations today, I'm not the only one that takes this approach. Trying to figure out how things work, so basic or fundamental science, is the goal in our lab, much like many of the other labs you saw talk today. So really what we do is we take this systematic approach and we consider the nervous system, and I'm talking about the importance of the spinal cord, and here I only show a picture of the brain, but this was the best jigsaw puzzle looking neural thing I could get online. So what we do is we do a systematic approach. How is the brain functioning to produce arm cycling, this locomotor output? What is the spinal cord doing? And we do study after study after study, and what we consider it is it's this huge jigsaw puzzle, and we're adding one piece at a time. That's how we go about examining the neural control of locomotion, all starting with Mike the Headless Chicken. I should have said, too, there's actually a county fair in Fruscia, Colorado, every year for Mike the Headless Chicken. So it's a big deal. I debated buying a chicken suit to do the presentation, but I didn't. So how do we go about doing this? Well, this topic, or how we do things, has already been introduced somewhat by Dr. Plowman, who just gave the recorded talk, and also Dr. Button also mentioned it. So how do we do this? Well, our lab, as Dr. Button already alluded to, there was a Gazette article in the MUN newspaper 2015, 2016, and when the, I guess, reporter, the science communication person came into the lab, the first thing they said was, it looks like a medieval torture chamber. And it kind of does. And we do stimulate the brain, we stimulate the back of the skull, as Dr. Button showed, and we do stimulate the nerve. And for the safety people in the audience, or the ethics people, you know, we refer to these as stimulating the brain doesn't hurt at all. Stimulating the nerve and so on, depending on the study, we say it's transiently unpleasant, which is code for sometimes it hurts a little bit, right? But all ethically sound. So this is what we do. So this is a picture of a younger me, beardless, holding a coil. That's the TMS coil. That's just a thing we use to stimulate the brain. We have a student here who's now a physician, Devin Philpott, and this is Davis Foreman, former grad student. He's now a professor in Ontario. And I'll see if the video works a little bit. And you can see we stimulate here, we stimulate at the base of the skull to measure spinal excitability. Remember Mike? And we record from the muscles, like Dr. Piercy went into, although not the same level that he does. So this works wonderfully. So we get them doing this rhythmic alternating movement. You can see the nervous blinks because he knows he's going to get shocked. But you can see the movement and how it's rhythmic, and it is very locomotor-like. And so by understanding arm cycling and how it's produced, how the brain works, how the spinal cord works, the idea is that we can lend that information, number one, to how locomotion works. They are not the exact same motor outputs, of course they're not, but they do have similar neural control mechanisms, and we are helping to understand how locomotion is actually produced by studying arm cycling. Now, okay, so that's great. So you're doing basic science, you're trying to figure out how we control locomotion with Arm cycling sounds kind of odd. So you could ask the question, well, that's basic science, but who cares? Who really cares about that stuff? Well, number one, I do. Hopefully the grad students, which I also have the best grad students at MUN. Um, and so shout out to Jiro and Alicia who are here. There you go. So who cares is the question. Well, if you think of arm cycling, you can use arm cycling for neural rehabilitation purposes. And in fact, it is used a fair amount. I can see some rehab specialists here in the room. And so this is a picture I just grabbed from online, and we have this kind of cycle ergometer, we call this, in the lab. A Rehab 881E. Sounds fancy, costs way more than it should. But if you walk into a stroke rehab unit, a spinal cord injury rehab unit, anybody with neurological impairments, you will most likely see one of these, if not more, or at least something that resembles these. Certainly an arm cycle ergometer. And if I were to walk into one of these rehab places, and it's typically set up the way you see here. So what you see is the arms are out of sync, the hands are pointed down, and if I were to ask the rehab specialist, why is it like that? Is it beneficial to try it differently? They may or may not have thought about it. And certainly the research world hasn't thought much about it because when I started looking at this, nobody had done it, so we did it. So there's a certain way you go about cycling, and the question becomes, what's the best way to facilitate plasticity, as Dr. Plowman mentioned, neuroplasticity in the brain and spinal cord? Now, presumably, if you want to increase rehabilitation, if you want to help regain motor control, motor output voluntarily, you want to raise excitability in the brain and the spinal cord. So, by using the techniques of transcranial magnetic stimulation and spinal stimulation, we can alter different ways you cycle to say, well, which one raises the excitability the most? So what is the best way to grip the handles? Is gripping with the hand pointed down best? Should it be like this, or should it be neutral? Turns out it makes a big difference, and we've published a study on this that says, well, at least from the muscles we recorded from, if you want to increase the excitability of the central nervous system, the part that's really helping you produce these movements, you want to have your hands like this. The company in this picture doesn't even sell the hand grips to do neutral grip, to have your hand face, your palm face sideways. What other questions have we asked? Well, what about synchronous or asynchronous? Now, to study locomotion, we want to study like this, because if you walked with you'd be hopping. We don't care about hopping, not in my lab. So if we want to study the neural control of locomotion, we do the alternating version. But again, if the goal is rehab purposes, should we be doing it this way or should we be doing it this way? Is there a difference? Turns out, yes, there is a difference. And again, from the muscles that we've measured, I would like to continue. Doing it like this is actually more beneficial. Now, the whys and stuff are up for debate and discussion. We won't get into that now, but perhaps in general, it's more challenging because locomotor output, if it's generated more by the spinal cord, like Mike the Headless Chicken, if you do synchronous, maybe that is more challenging for the brain. So it makes it more susceptible to plasticity for rehab. And like everybody else, after that shows up, nothing works. There we go. What about the intensity? Well, there's certain intensities, certain resistance, certain speeds or a cadence that is typically, it has a setting on it for you. Go 50 watts or 50 RPMs, revolutions per minute at 25 watts. That's what's set. But why? Why not go faster? What happens if you go faster? What happens if you add resistance? Turns out how you change the intensity alters how the brain and spinal cord produce the movement. We've published a lot of studies in that area. Does training alter brain or spinal excitability? Well, Dr. Button kind of stole my thunder a little bit when he showed the figure from Evan Lockyer's PhD, when in fact it does. It makes the spinal cord, if you do arm cycling training, it makes the spinal cord more excitable. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means you probably need less effort from your brain to activate the motor output. Could combat fatigue, would certainly help with things with motor disorders where you want to have less requirements from the brain. And on that note, Who cares? Well, all of these students do. This is an older picture, and myself and Dr. Button and Dr. Piercy and Bain need to get a new picture, but this is, the students really do make the world go around, much like the pedals on the bike. Got to leave you with one. That was a joke. You can laugh if you want. Pity laughs are also welcome. So what we do is the graduate students really do make all of this go around. Without them, we can't do any of this. We get the kind of glory, as it were, to be able to get here and talk about it. But the grad students certainly put in the hard work. And if you're interested in more dad jokes and or science, you can follow the lab on Rock Solid Science on the Rock. And guess who came up with that name? Or you can follow myself at Twitter. Lots of hockey posts as well if you're interested. And with that, I will say thank you.